Okay, so let's get into hearing God. One of the most difficult things that we are practicing and learning. There isn't a one-way path to this. It's an up and down path, but it's an extremely important conversation to have and to begin to practice more and more. Because what we're going to start noticing more and more on the planet is the duality or dichotomy of the noise and the silence. Everything else, everyone else, and God. All the other opinions and beliefs and ways to navigate, and then God, right? And so there will be a craving for stillness and the inability to find it because of how loud this is going to get. So we're going to see this split, hearing God and not hearing God. Organic path, inorganic path, inverted matrix, the natural way. Everything else, all the other stuff, and just simply God. This is a split that we're going to just continue to see. And people are going to find themselves eventually playing in this and then coming back to the pure essence of this God frequency, this God presence, and learning how to do that it's not from a story, it's not in a program, it's not in a system, it's not in somebody, right? It is your divine, unique, pure connection. And so that's what we're talking about today. How do I hear that? How do I connect to that? Not from others, not through others, but how do I connect in? And so there's two things that I'm going to kind of dive into today. And I will answer your questions at the end. I don't know what's going on with my forehead. Finding the voice behind the noise. So we want to find this voice or hear it, bring it into the forefront. And then the second thing is becoming really familiar with that voice. So two things. How do we find it? How do we hear it? And then how do we become familiar with it? Because that's really the key in hearing it, is becoming familiar. I want you to imagine that hearing God's voice is like building a relationship with someone. Okay? If you meet somebody the very first time, maybe you'll hear them as you converse with them. But you won't actually kind of know who they are, right? You won't hear them throughout your day. If you were to imagine what it would be like to hang out with them again, you wouldn't really be able to grab anything. You don't really have a familiarity with that person, right? But imagine that you go and you sit with that person every day. You start connecting with that person every day. Then you become familiar with them. You know their ins and outs, what they like and what they don't like, what they sound like, how they respond, how they feel about things, right? And so then when you're out and about in your everyday life and you think to yourself, man, if so-and-so is here, they would love this. They would think ... or they would feel ... or I bet they would tell me ... So you become familiar with that person. You become familiar with their essence, with the way they express. And that's what we do with God. We have to become familiar with it. It's an essence, it's a presence. So that's what we're learning. So the first thing I want to dive into is, what is the voice of God? Like, what is it, right? What is it and what does it sound like? And so every single one of us gets to define this in our own way. You get to have your unique expression and relationship and experience with God. But what I will say, and what I do recommend, is that I want you to understand or begin to visualize that we live in this bubble, this veil, this matrix, the 12th dimensional matrix, which I wrote about. And the 12th dimensional matrix holds the illusion, it holds the veil. Everything inside of this is not, it's aspects of God, but it's not God. So it's just story. Okay, so everything that is inside of anything that you could possibly imagine, see, experience in any realm, in any dimension, in the 12th dimension, as well as outside. Okay, anything outside of the 12th dimension is also in the illusion, in the sense that it is a part of creation's choice. So consciousness choosing to experience itself, but it's not truth, right? Pure truth, pure truth, pure God is outside of everything. It's outside of all story. It's outside of all program. It's outside of all galactics, all angels, all masters, all everything. God is outside of all of that. And God is found through this pure quieting of all the noise, this pure connection out and then back in. You have to plug into that source. And so that's what you're learning to do. That's the voice. And so however that feels to you, however it looks to you, but I want you to imagine that you're literally taking a straw in a way. You're poking it through all the veils. You're poking it through the 12th dimension, the 5th dimension, the 4th dimension, all dimensions, all time and space, all quantum physics, quantum realities, all of it. You're poking it out beyond all of that. Okay, so even though all of that has aspects of God in it, you want to go directly to source. So you're plugging your straw right into source. And I want you to imagine this for a moment, because this is the problem with hearing God right now on this planet. When you're trying to poke your straw to source, I want you to realize that you're poking it through all the information you receive all day long, the podcasts, the YouTubes, the channelings, the meditations, the dialogue with your friends and family, the conversations with people online, the emails, the work, everything is coming in as you are trying to poke your straw out. This is what Jesus meant when he said, you are in the world, but you are not of the world. What he meant by that, what he truly meant by that, was that you are going to stand in the illusions, in the veils, with all the noise, with all the different information, with all the different species and aliens and angels and all the different people with all their different information and the ways that they do things and all the systems and government, political, money, all of that. You're standing in it. But you're not going to be of it any longer, because you're going to be breathing, living, and focusing on this pure divine light of God coming in, staying aligned and connected with God, listening to God, following God instead of everything else. This is a process. This is a journey. This is the evolution in human consciousness. This is what we are doing here. When people say we're going to 5D, what they mean is that we're going to God. And God's coming back in. So I want you to think about this going forward when we're talking about listening to God. What you're doing is you're taking a little straw from your ear and you're going straight up, and you have to get rid of all that noise. So you do realize how difficult this is, right? You do realize that everyone's going to tell you all the different ways to do it, or what it sounds like, or what's God, what's not God, everything. And so how are you going to begin to focus on this straw? I don't even know why I'm saying straw, because it's breathing, but you're also hearing. So like a little funnel from your ear all the way up to source. You can argue that source is inside of you, an aspect of God is inside of you, but that's actually not where you're going to hear God first. You're going to hear God first by plugging it in, inviting it back in, and then you start hearing it within you. But you're not going to hear anything in you if you haven't plugged back into source. You're going to hear everybody else. You're going to hear other energies, other things, but you're not going to hear God. So we hear God when we start to plug in first, and then we invite God back in, and then God becomes this amphitheater in our bodies. The Holy Spirit, the Holy Light starts to amplify. So you are hearing both in and out, but make sure you are sort of recognizing that you're plugging into something outside of all the noise. Okay, you're aligning with something outside of all the noise in order to hear it within you. So what does it sound like? And again, this is going to be different for everybody, but I'll share with you what it sounds like to me. And maybe it's the same with you. It's a very still, small voice. I typically hear this voice either within my own head as a voice, or I hear it sort of like in the peripheral, not outside of me in the sense that it's like some random voice that's coming in, but there's this peripheral presence that's sort of, it's like this is the way like this presence here that just sort of chimes in every once in a while, soft, very soft, very quiet, very gentle voice. It's a direct voice. It doesn't have a personality. It doesn't have doesn't have traits. It's not female. It's not male. It's not angelic, galactic. It's not the higher self. It's not anything that we've labeled. It's outside of the label. It's this presence that when you start to hear it, it just feels right. It feels like home. It feels pure. It feels like truth. It's very, very simple. It's very, very simple. It feels calming. It feels peaceful. It feels grounding. It doesn't wreck my nervous system. It's not complex. It's not confusing. It doesn't hold fear. It holds truth. It's not always what I'm choosing to hear or what I want to hear. I can't control it. And so what happens when you start listening to God is that you start to battle you and God in a sense, free will and divine will, which we'll talk about. But it becomes this really interesting tug of war where you sort of want to hear what you want to hear. And then you're not hearing that because God's actually saying something different. So then you question it because, you're a creator being, and shouldn't you be creating everything you want in the world, in the universe, and we're all energy and we create what we want? Well, not when you connect with God. It's a little different. God realigns you with truth. So God's going to pull you out of illusion, which is this whole world. So if God's going to pull you out of illusion, you're not necessarily going to like everything that happens. It's not going to be on your manifestation board or your vision board when you really work with God, when you really start listening to God. And I think that's part of the problem, is that we listen to what we want to hear because we want to create the life we want. But when we really sit down and start listening to God, God's role is to bring us back to our divinity, and your divinity lives outside of illusion. And so when you start to come back into your divinity, it's going to pull you from the illusion, from your desires, from your wants, from the things that you think you want. Because typically the things that you think you want are what God naturally gives you. So I want to travel because it makes me feel free. Well, when God comes in more and more, when God's activating that divinity, when God's speaking to you, it's going to say, stay put. I'm going to show you freedom so you're not dependent on these external things to find it, right? So it's a very interesting experience you begin to have. Another example would be that you want a better job because you want to feel purposeful. And God says, God might say to you, relax. Or it might say, you don't need to look. You're like, yes, I do. Of course I need to look. You don't need to look. That's the voice you hear, right? You don't need to look. Like, what? Of course I need to look. I need a better job. I want a job where I feel like I'm doing more. What God's showing you is, one, trust God, because God will show you the next job when it's time. And the other thing is that God's going to create a sense of purpose within you that may be very different than in a job. And so this is the real challenge of listening to God, but also the beauty of listening to God, because God starts to take over. So I'll get into the how we do this, the action in surrender as well. But okay, so that's basically what God sounds like. That's what it sounds like to me. God comes in and is, God's also repetitive. Like it's a record player until we get it. So you'll hear it over and over and over and over until it sinks in and you accept it. So God can be repetitive. God's not judgmental or condoning, violent, angry, aggressive, very patient. The presence of God is very patient. So here are a handful of ways that God comes in. And there may be more than this. This is not the only list, right? So one way that you're going to hear God is through your voice, like a voice, like a voice inside your head. And so again, when we go back to the beginning of this class, you're learning how to become familiar with God. And so you have to become familiar with the voice. And the only way you can become familiar with the voice of God is by sitting with it, by getting quiet, by choosing to focus, like, oh, I'm in conversation with God. I can't hear anything. It doesn't matter. I'm still in conversation with God. I'm sitting in silence with God. I don't hear anything. It doesn't matter. I'm learning how to become familiar with it. It's like you're in a dark room with God there, the presence of God, and it's dark. But slowly but surely, the more you sit there, the dimmer light starts to go up, right? And it starts to get a little brighter, a little brighter, a little brighter, a little brighter. And eventually you start to see, i.e., hear, experience God. But at first, we're all in that dark room. The dark room is where we start. Welcome to this illusion. And so you're in a dark room where you've got 20,000 TVs on at the same time, taking your attention. Literally. All day long, you're in this dark room trying to hear, experience God. But all you can see and hear are these loud televisions. And then you're walking around saying, how come I can't hear God? I don't hear God. I'm talking to God. I'm sitting with God. I'm speaking to God. It's not your fault. You can't hear God because you live in a world that's designed to keep you from hearing God. So it's going to do everything it can to make sure you don't hear God. And so what you want to think about is, if I'm in a dark room with God and there's 1,000 televisions and screens on all day long, what's the best way that I personally can start to hear God more? So for you, what is the best way for you to personally be able to start to hear God in the dark room where there's 1,800 things happening? You got a job, you got kids, you got other things, you've got bills, you've got a podcast, you got a YouTube, you got an Instagram, you got a TikTok, you got all kinds, they're all on the wall. You're like, I wonder everything's pulling for your attention. So what's the best way for you? That's what you want to start thinking about throughout your day. So the first way is God comes in through the voice, through your head. The voice is in your head. You got to get familiar with that voice. The second way that you can hear God is your intuition, a feeling state. God, something's telling me to go do this. God, I get this weird vibe that I need to go say this, or I need to go to this place, or right. God will use your intuition, but it's very tricky. Intuition can be very, very tricky. So I want you to understand, let's go back to the conversation earlier where we talked about the tug of war. This is really important. The tug of war is you and God, the world and God. And we've been programmed to follow what feels good. We've been programmed to follow what we want, our desires, fulfilling our desires, fulfilling our needs, getting our needs met, creating, manifesting. We've been the one doing it. And so we're like, oh yeah, I followed my intuition and my intuition told me ... This felt good, so I did ... This felt right, so I did ... Now, sometimes it's the intuitive hit from God, but sometimes it's just our own need to satiate a desire, a feeling. God, I just really felt like I needed to go do, something. I really needed to call this person because it was going to make me feel better, or it was placed in my heart to go do it. Or you're going to have to play with this. But there's a difference between God coming in and using your intuition. So this getting a hit that you need to go do something, getting this call to go say something or to go read something, or there's a difference between that and an intuitive hit that may be more just something that you want, something that you're feeling, something that you're craving. So it's tricky. Intuition can be tricky when you're working with God. So what you want to do is you're fine-tuning or discerning the intuition. And you want to, this is how you want to discern the intuition. And this is how you want to discern in general. Do I want this? Or does God want this? You'll start feeling the difference. It's very subtle. Don't get too caught up in this. Don't make it too complicated for you, but just put this in your back pocket as something that you're going to start thinking about or navigating. When your intuition comes in, ask yourself as it's coming in, is this something that I'm really wanting, or is this truly something that's just arising? If it's just arising and it's just coming forth, it's typically God. If it's kind of really something you want, you're desiring it, you're craving it, it's probably you. So just play in that. It can be confusing, but it is something to be aware of, that discernment. Another way that it comes through is in signs. Okay, so signs can be literally physical signs where God's speaking to you in signs. And the signs, it can be through people. God, somebody will come over to your house, or somebody will email you, or somebody will call you and all of a sudden give you some information, a message, and you're like, oh my God, that was God sent. You're a godsend. We say that all the time. We don't realize what we're actually saying. Yeah, God did send this person. 100%. That's a godsend. God will send you God winks, which can be, something from an animal, something from maybe it's a song that you hear. Maybe it's something that you just randomly, it popped up on YouTube, and the next thing you just know that it's from God. You know that it's answering a question. You know that it is a sign from God. We all know those moments. We all know it's a sign from God. We don't have to be told, right? And so starting to look at those things, because that's how God communicates a lot with us in the beginning. That's what builds our faith. So you want to stay open to that, receptive to that, trusting that. Don't just blow it off like, oh, that was just a coincidence. Because when you brush it off or you doubt it, you're not putting value on the relationship with you and God, right? You're just sort of, it's just like you're shaking it off like no big deal. It's a big deal building a relationship with God. It's everything. It's your entire journey in life. This is the whole purpose of life, is to learn your divine natural state of being, which is divine union, divine connection back in with God. And then watching that play out in your life and watching it change everything, the way you respond to people and places and events, and just all of it starts to shift for you. And the planet is beginning to experience this more and more. And thank God we're still on the planet to be able to begin to really feel this, really embody this. This is the beginning of the shift. And so we are so lucky to be able to be in this beginning wave of integrating back God into our bodies and into our lives in a very grounded, physical, tangible way. And another way that God speaks to us is writing or in creativity, being creative, dancing, writing, singing, drawing, painting, that kind of thing, right? Being in nature. God speaks when you're in nature. And so that's another way that that God communicates. And if you're a creative person, get into your creativity. If you're not a creative person, what brings you a sense of flow, stepping out of the norm for a moment? Maybe it's riding a bike, maybe it's swimming, maybe it's running, right? These types of things bring us into this flow state where from that state of flow, God moves in. And then the last thing is really feeling states. Now, we want to be careful with feeling states. I'm not going to go too deep into this, but it's important to know that you will feel God. You find a house you like and it feels right? You meet somebody and it feels right. You have a conversation with someone and it feels aligned. That's God. Okay. But because we live in a huge illusion and distorted reality right now, where we are bombarded with infiltrated thoughts and this belief that all of your desires that you have are normal and natural and they are fulfilled from the external world. Sometimes when we meet someone or sometimes when we have this great experience, it's actually endorphins. It's actually like serotonin or, something that is creating some sort of physiological response or some sort of addictive thing or a trigger from a trauma, a trigger from a limiting belief. And so you feel like, oh my God, this was a godsend. They were supposed to come into my life and this just feels so right. And then, a month later, you realize that they were completely not correct, not right for you, wrong, not good. How did I get this wrong? Right? You meet somebody, it's a business part, and you're like, oh my God, we connected. It just felt so right. I just knew this was the person. And 2 months later, you realize they're completely narcissistic and they're deceitful and like, how did I get that wrong? Right. So this also goes back to our intuition. My intuition told me, no, 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 no. Something else physiologically was being released energetically when you connected. And so that's why, and there was a feeling that came up and it was just like, oh my God, this feels so good. That's why we want to be very, very discerning between what I'm feeling. Oh my God, this is it. And I just know it. My intuition is just, I just know. And God, because God's going to rattle you when you start to say, okay, I'm feeling great. This person feels amazing, but let me push pause because God doesn't work that way all the time. God's not this like, oh, blissful, loving, like, I'm just going to follow my heart. That's actually not God. That's not divinity. Divinity is discerning. Divinity understands the spiritual battle. Divinity understands infiltration. Your divinity knows how to navigate this world. It knows how to navigate wolves in sheep's clothing. It knows how to see beyond. And so a lot of people think that God is this like all loving, all encompassing reaction and response to life. And that's true on one sense, that God is an overarching essence of love, of just absolute love. But when God is moving through in duality, in illusion, in infiltration, God's going to shine the light. So God's going to show you the distortion. God's going to show you infiltration. Your divinity is going to show you, nope, you're actually following what you really want, but that's not what's best for you. And you're going to override that. You're going to override divinity. You're going to override God because you want to fulfill the desire in you. You want to follow my heart. I'm going to follow my joy. I'm going to follow that. But unless you're aligned with God, it might not be the highest outcome. So you're constantly having to check with God. You're constantly having to push pause and say, hold on, let me check with God. And you have to be willing to be wrong. You have to be willing to not follow the temptation. God doesn't work in temptation. God doesn't work in just fulfilling all your desires so you feel good. That's the illusion. That's the spiritual battle. The spiritual battle plays off of our desires. It runs us on temptation. And so it can be very dangerous when we say, I'm just going to follow my heart. It gets us into a lot of trouble. Not bad. But when you start working in a completely different reality, which is aligned with your divinity, which is not you, it is not you, and it is not your desires and your wants and the manifestations and all the money and all, that's not you. I mean, that's you. That's not divinity. Divinity is very different. And we have to get familiar with that divinity. We have to get familiar with God and how God's essence works and moves us out of the illusion and into our divinity. So as you're playing with this and as you're listening to God, just recognize that, just start discerning really, and just be humble with yourself where you're like, I don't care, I'm going all in, I really feel like, and you're going to learn. You'll start learning like, wow, what did I miss, right? I've done this so many times in my life. Before I was really aligning and choosing God, I would always be like, what did I miss with this person? Or I saw that I saw that red flag. I just didn't listen, right? God's like, hey, your intuition knows, but you're like, I want this so bad. Or I feel like this could happen. This could work. It's going to be so great. So you override the red flags. Go to God. Just keep asking God for the guidance when you have any situation in your life, and become familiar so that you can recognize God, so that you can, you just build this relationship with it so that you trust it so deeply, so that any moment, any situation, you are going to God first, not a psychic, not a intuitive, not your parents, not your friends, not your lover, not your husband or wife. You're going to God first. So you're learning how to do that first. In the meantime, we use everybody else, but eventually you'll just go to God. It's the greatest feeling on the planet when you have this relationship, and you all will have it. You all will have it. Okay. So let's talk about how to start to hear God more. Okay. I've got a couple of steps for you guys. You've all been doing this, but we're just going to dive into this a little bit more. Hi, Lisa Afoy. Happy to have you here. Happy to have you here. Okay. All right. So the first and most important thing, and if we go back to the analogy of being in the room, in the room where it's dark and there's just God, you call God in, you're like, all right, let's go. And then you've got 100 other things, 10,000 other things on the walls coming at you, right? So the number one most important thing in hearing God, and the most difficult, is silence. You must put yourself in silence throughout the day. You must start choosing silence. If you're going to choose God, you must choose silence. You've got to fight for that silence. So I always use these examples, but maybe before you start a TV show or a podcast or a Netflix, or you get into your car, instead of turning on something, just sit in silence with God. And what that means is that you're sitting in silence with the awareness that you're going to be with God. Now, for those of you that are brand new doing this, actually for all of us, it's uncomfortable. Like, I don't hear anything. Should I talk? Should I not talk? All I'm doing is thinking about what I'm going to eat or where I'm going or what I'm going to say. Or you pass by somebody and they annoy you. So then you're frustrated. It takes 2.2 seconds to pull us out of presence with God in silence. It's very, very challenging. But I encourage you to begin doing this. And I try to remind myself, I have a practice every day where I sit in silence no matter what. If I give myself 10 minutes, great, 30 minutes, great, an hour, great. But I try to do it way more than once a day. But if all you have is 5 minutes, okay, give yourself the 5 minutes of silence. And it's an intention of, I'm with God. And that's it. You're with God. There's no expectation. There's no attachment. You don't do it right. You don't do it wrong. You're just being with it. You're learning how to build this. You're learning how to listen. You're learning how to engage. It's like you're starting all over again with a brand new relationship with someone. You've got to get to know them. And the only way to get to know them is to sit with them. This is a presence that we can't continue to, I'm sorry to say this, it's going to ruffle a lot of feathers, but we can't just continue to walk through life thinking that, well, God's in everything and God's in me, so I'm God and it's all good. God's not moving through your life. God's not making impacts in your life. You're not actually engaging with God. You need to engage. There needs to be a relationship. There needs to be a dialogue. How else do we become God-like if we're not actually engaging with God? It just magically happens? No. God has to come in and push against all the ways that we are being. That's what God's going to do. On top of bringing peace, joy, contentment, ease, confidence, grace, all the great things, God's also going to come in as this presence and push against everything that you have been living in order to pull you out of it, right? So we have to engage. And the silence allows for you to say, okay, I'm going to engage in the silence, just thinking about God, breathing with God. Maybe I talk, maybe I ask a question, but I'm not going to hold tight to an attachment to an outcome. Because you're in a dark room. What kind of outcome do you think you're going to get? So you're in a dark room with God and you're upset because you can't hear anything. It's like with all these TVs and you're angry because you sat for 10 minutes and you didn't hear anything. So you walk out of the room and you're like, I'm not doing that again. It's like, well, that's the setup. We're all going to be in that dark room. Those of us that start hearing God are the ones that keep going back. We keep walking back into that room, sitting down. We keep going back, and that's the third part of this is commitment. But you keep going back to that room. You don't say, well, nothing's happening. Of course not. You've got to wait. You got to have patience, which is the fourth piece. So silence, sit with God in silence, get quiet and still, turn everything off, and then listen. Just listen. Listen with curiosity, listen with an openness. But this is the biggest hack and the hardest. The second thing you're doing is you are becoming familiar with that presence, and the way you become familiar with that presence is you start kind of like tapping into God. Okay, God's here. God's presence is here. I keep feeling like there's a thing on my forehead, but it's like I think it's like a shadow. It's very strange. You're listening. You're feeling. It's like you're putting your tentacles out, and you're opening, like, is God here? Is God not here? Do I feel? Do I hear? What's happening? But you don't want to, when we do this, when we're starting to become familiar with the essence in me, around me, you don't want to put a lot of pressure on yourself when you're doing this. So you want to do it, but you don't want to put pressure on, right? But you want to recognize when you're in your grocery store, okay, God, are you with me? Are you here? That kind of thing. You could write. It's going to come in many different ways. So you don't want to say to yourself, that's not God. I'm not going to write this down. When you begin communicating and hearing God, you have to choose to believe it. 99% of us sit in the dark room with God. God says something, we hear it, but we're like, it's probably just me. And so we walk out saying, I didn't hear anything. Somebody else walks in that dark room with all the TVs playing, and God says something and they hear it and they walk out and they're like, yeah, God spoke to me. You're like, how did God speak to you? God didn't speak to me. Yeah, God did. You just chose not to believe it. And that person chose to believe it. That's the only difference. And so when you start listening to God, when you do hear something that you think might be God, just choose to believe it is. And the more you do that, the more you begin to hear God. If you're constantly saying that's not God in a room with God, you're never going to hear God. I can guarantee you that. Because God's speaking to you, but you're just choosing not to believe it because you think it needs to be a certain way. You know that parable that people talk about. So there was a man that died and he was up in heaven and he was angry because he said to God, how come when I was, lost at sea, when I was lost at sea before I died, you never sent anyone to save me? Or no, you never came to save me. You never sent anyone. Um, and I think I messed up the story. There was a guy, and he was out on he was stranded in the ocean, and a big ship came by, and the guy says, "No, I'm waiting for God to save me." So then a sailboat comes by. "No, I'm waiting for God to save me." A paddle boat comes by. "No, I'm waiting for God to save me." Right? And so then the dude just dies, and he goes up to heaven. He's like, "How come you didn't save anyone?" He's like, "I sent a ship, a sailboat, a this, a that. You didn't take any of them." And that's how God works. It's a beautiful analogy of how God works. God's always speaking to us. It's a matter of whether we are choosing to believe that it's God or not. And if you choose to not believe it, you will never hear God. It is that simple. It's that simple. So if you're constantly saying, I don't know if this is God or not, it doesn't matter. Choose to believe it. It's the number one hack in beginning to hear God. And for those of you that don't hear anything, that's a whole different game that we're all playing. We just don't hear anything. But when you see a sign, when you hear something, when you feel something, choose to believe it's God. Number 3, so we have silence, familiarity, which is just constantly putting your feelers out, constantly staying open to God, learning from God, playing with God, curiosity, right? Just dialoguing with God, choosing to believe it's God. The third one is commitment. You have to commit to this. It can't be something that you just sit back and wait for or hope for. You have to choose it every day. It's work. It's beautiful work, but it's work. If you want it, it's a constant daily awareness. And it's like going back into that room every day and not having frustration and not putting a timestamp on it and not saying it needs to be a certain way because every day is different. But choosing God every day in some capacity. Some days it's easier than others, but it is a commitment. And I think that's also what's missing on this planet is the recognition that this is not something that is just that just happens to you and is given to you because you have an aspect of God in you. We live in a spiritual battle that many people are very unaware of. They don't understand this spiritual battle we're in. It's not their fault, but they don't understand it. And so if you don't understand the battle, you're not going to understand what to do in order to walk back into your divinity. God has been taken from us. Yes, we're an aspect of God. Yes, God is in everything, 100%. But our divine experience of that living light moving into our bodies has been distorted. And so we have to bring that back in. And so you have to fight for it. You have to sit with it. You have to commit to it every day. You have to choose God every day. The more that you focus on God, choose God, your lens is on God, as hard as it is in that room, the more you're going to hear, the more you're going to feel, the more you're going to experience, the more your entire life is going to change. When you start listening to God over that podcast, when you start asking God over that scientist, when you start going to God before all the other authorities on the planet, God's going to rock your world. God's going to show you things that you never knew were possible. Everything is beautiful. Everything's entertainment and information and knowledge and important. It's all very important. But nothing is more important than God. Nothing. Nothing. So you consume everything you're consuming, but you consume God as well. And you consume God first if you can, or at least with everything else. So imagine you're back in that room and it's a dark room. You've got 12 TVs in front of you with all these different people sharing information, talking to you. Most of them are being somewhat deceptive, unbeknownst to themselves, but that's a whole other dialogue and conversation and class that we should have, master class we should have on deception. But God's sitting next to you. And so instead of just watching everything and taking it all in and trying to figure it out and decipher between it and buying into it all, you sit and you say, God, what do you think about this? God, how do you see this? How would you look at this right now? So you're in a room with God. Why are you not asking God? Why do you think it's just you? That's how you want to start looking at things, and you want to commit every time you walk into that room and you're sitting down with God, you're committing to doing life with God, and you'll watch your whole life change. Number 4 is patience. This is key. This is key, patience. We live in a planet where we have been convinced, because this is how we are controlled, we have been convinced to, sorry, it's got a random thought that came in. I really want to share this masterclass with the world. Really want the world to hear this. So we might put this on YouTube. That just randomly popped in. Okay, so for instance, so let's talk about listening to God. That was a random thought. That was not my thought. It popped in. This is how God works. It pops in the middle of, for no reason. And it's just almost like a knowingness, or just like a boom, put this on YouTube for the world. And so then you're like, oh, that's random and weird. And then you start thinking to yourself, why would I do that? It's a paid thing in my community. And then it's like, well, no, everybody needs to hear it. So you need to put it out. And then, so you have all this dialogue. Well, was that God? I don't know if that was God. It didn't sound like God. It didn't feel anything. Well, Lori said it's supposed to feel calm, and I didn't feel calm listening to that. This is what we do. There's 1,000 things that I'm sharing with you about listening to God, and all of them make sense when they're making sense, but there's so many different ways that you're going to be experiencing God. You don't want to take it so tightly and so restrictive that when God comes in, you're just like, nope, that's not exactly what Lori said. Remember, she said this. You don't want to do that with these teachings, right? It's like you're just like an open book of like however it comes through. I'm so curious. But that's an example of God. That was not me. That was not my higher self. That was not anything other than the presence of God. And how do I know it's God? Because you become familiar with God. You start becoming familiar. It's like, how do you know that's your mom? Because you're familiar with your mom. How do you know that's your best friend? Because you're familiar with your best friend, like you could be blindfolded and hear their voice. Now, granted, it's different because it's tangible when you hear a voice. It's the exact same thing though. You could hear your mother's voice, right? And you're like, well, who is that? Oh, that's my mom. Who's that? Oh, that's my brother. Who's that? Oh, that's my best friend. Obviously, it's the voice, okay? But even if we took away the voice and their presence came in, I bet you could start to feel their presence just by them sitting down. It would be an interesting experiment. But we become familiar with these people. It's the same thing with God. You eventually start to become familiar with how God works. Right? So, patience. Ask for guidance, ask for signs, ask for God to keep coming in, and then just have patience. Have a knowingness that it's happening no matter what. A knowingness that it's happening no matter what. Allow for the pauses, allow for the silence, allow for the confusion, allow for all of that. Right? Give yourself permission to just be in this journey, because you're in a room, it's dark, you got the TVs on, God's right next to you as this presence, God's inside of you like as this presence simultaneously, and you're like, let's see how this goes. Right? Okay, I'm going to keep dialoguing, I'm going to keep talking, I'm going to keep questioning, because I know that I'm in a room that is dark. I know it's going to be difficult, but I'm going to keep doing it. I'm going to allow for time. I'm going to allow for pause. I'm going to allow the patience. There's nothing wrong with patience, meaning there's nothing wrong with, I still don't hear. Okay, keep going in the room. Choose to believe you're sitting next to God. Choose to believe God's living in you. Choose to believe this, and then play in the choice of, I'm believing this. Let's go. Start from that lens as opposed to, there are days where I hear nothing. There are days where I feel so far away from God. These last 3 days, I have felt so far from God, but very close to Jesus, but very far from Creator, Source, but very close to God, Jesus. They're the same, but they feel different. Usually I feel both merging around in this way. It's hard to explain this, but it's very uncomfortable when you don't feel that essence around you. But it's normal. It's not, it's just what happens. I don't stop. I don't say there's something wrong with me. I just keep going into the room. I just keep sitting down. I keep talking. I keep dialoguing. I keep inviting. I keep choosing. Okay, so those are the 4 things that I really wanted to talk about in terms of how to hear. It's the silence, the getting familiar, having the commitment, and having that patience. And all the different ways that we just discussed doing that. And now here are a couple of tools that I want to dive into, and then I'll open it up to questions. Well, there's a couple more steps. So some of the tools, get curious. Just think about curiosity. I'm getting curious. Stay open. Okay, keep staying open. You want to check, is this me or is this God? Discernment. Is this really what I want or is this what God wants? Is this God's desire or my desire? That's a huge piece in this. Now, I share this because it is important, but I don't want to share this so that you guys get caught up in it and get really confused around it. So don't take this with a grain of salt right now. What's most important is that you just start walking into the room, sitting down and listening. Don't jump to, oh my God, I'm hearing something, but maybe that's me, maybe that's God. Just put this in your back pocket. So as you start hearing more and more, as you start dialoguing more and more with God, this will become something that you're going to want to really discern. Okay. But in the beginning, if you're just learning to listen and connect, put it in the back pocket for a little while, because otherwise it's going to confuse you and make you go cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. And then the last little tool is just being really comfortable in the unknown, because God's going to walk you through new ways of being, new ways of hearing, new ways of listening, new ways. It's all new. And so really, honestly, be okay with just unknown, the unknown of things. That's God. That's God. So what is needed? What is needed? Faith. You have to have faith when you start hearing God and listening to God and talking to God. You have to have faith, which is an absolute knowingness that you're with God. No matter how many times you have thoughts that say you're not, I can't hear anything, nothing's happening, that is simply a thought based on your physical reality, your physical experience. It's not true. You're in the room with God the moment you sit and say, let's go, God. That's actually the truth. And so that's a choice you have to make. I can't make that choice for you. You can't learn that choice. You have to choose that choice. You have to choose faith. And that is going to make the difference in hearing God and not hearing God, is that no matter how many times you walk into the room and hear nothing, you still choose faith. It's the story of little James in the Bible. Go read that story. Jesus didn't heal little James, and little James said, why? And he goes, because think of the lesson that you're going to teach people by still having faith in me, even though I didn't heal you. It's a profound teaching. So just because you don't get what you want from God in the beginning or ever, right? Just because things don't pan out the way you want, what, you're going to turn your back on God? You and divinity are different. You and God are different right now. You're learning to merge. And so you're learning how to trust God. You're learning how to walk with God. You're learning how to let God show you. You're learning how to let God come in and wrap itself around the ego. Fix this, heal this, master this, give me that. Why are you not doing it this way? Why are you not talking to me? Why are you not? It's me, me, me. So it's this little kid that's learning how to let God come in and let God show. So faith is everything. It's not your show to dictate. Right? You got to surrender and say, I'm having faith no matter what, because God's going to come in and change your entire life. Slowly but surely, God's going to change your life. Choose God, choose faith. Number 2, trust. You have to have absolute trust, and they are different. Faith and trust are different. Faith is absolute knowingness that God's right there. Trust is trusting what's unraveling, trusting when things go to shambles, trusting when there is an obstacle, trusting when it doesn't feel quite perfect, trusting when you are still sick, trusting the process. I trust you, God. I know you got me. I know you got me, and I know this is happening with you, so I'm good. I'm trusting. I have faith. But faith is absolute knowingness that God's right there, that God's communicating, that God's guiding, that God's leading, and then trusting every step of the way. The obstacles that happen are perfect. In fact, you want to really pay attention to the obstacles. I'll share a story about what happened today or later. The other thing that you want to recognize is the discernment that we talked about, that typically when God moves in, it's smooth for the most part. There might be obstacles, things are going to get pulled from you. Things may not work out exactly the way you think, but things are also going to work out even better. So many times there will be, when you're on a path, like, oh, I'm going to go this way and I'm going to do this, and then an obstacle happens and then another obstacle, we tend to think, oh, we're being tested and how badly do I want this? I'm going to push through the obstacle. That may or may not be correct. That may or may not be what God's showing you. Many times God puts obstacles in us to divert us to a different direction. The computer will break all of a sudden. The credit card won't go through. The application got lost. You've got a flat tire and you couldn't make it to an event. There's all kinds of ways in which God comes in and intervenes, right? And so you have to recognize that there's a perfection in the way God works. And it's always, when God works, it's always smooth. Like there's always this, like there's no massive efforting. There's no massive efforting. It's not effortless because you have to always take action with God, but it's not a push towards something. You're never pushing to make something happen when God's involved. Our whole planet lives off this idea that you have to sort of, you have to push to create and to make. Or you're like, I'm just going to be the creator of everything and manifest it all from my energy and manipulate energy. And that's also you. When God comes in, there's this dance that happens between your ego and persona and God. And so you have to let go of how you think it's going to go. You have to let go of how you want it to be. You have to let go of your pride and your need for things and your control, and you have to let God come in and dance. And when God comes in and starts dancing with you, it's very smooth. There's the ups and downs and the obstacles, but it feels smooth. And so that's what you're practicing. That's what you're learning. That is that's the quick rendition of how to start hearing God, but also just a beautiful class in how to start living more and more with God. I mean, we've been talking about this for months. Each month we are talking about this, but the beauty of continuing to talk about it is a conversation that needs to be spoken all the time, because we live in that dark room where we are told to focus on all these other things. And the true focus on God is dimmed. And the illusion that, like, oh no, God's with me all the time and I'm one with God, and that's not actually true, in the sense that you're not actually letting God lead you. Because when God comes in and leads you, it's going to rattle your life in a good way and in a not so great way, right? But it's impossible for God to actually come into your life and not change you from the inside out. That's what the evolution in human consciousness is. That's what it means to go from a third dimensional state of being to a 5, 6, 7 dimensional state of being in human, is that you are literally changed from the inside out. And not changed the way you want to change or how you see it, but change innately and naturally from God. So you're not actually doing anything. And so we're all in the beginning stages of this, literally. Like, we're like newborns that just came out of the body, newborns just came out of the womb, and we're like learning now. Oh, I open up my eyes and I do this, and that's how new we are to this embodiment of God in our bodies and in our lives. No matter how much we want to say that we've been living with God and we are God and we're connected and it's all one and all that, we will eventually start to really open our eyes to the spiritual battle and what it's actually done to us and this planet. And so the more that you engage, the more that you sit in that room with God, God's going to show you. I won't have to do anything. God's going to show you. God's going to change you from the inside out. So right now it's baby steps for us, okay? Maybe you're starting to feel a little bit more with God. Maybe there's a little more calm every once in a while. Maybe you're feeling a little more faith or trust. Maybe you feel like, you know what, today I felt like I was taken care of and nothing really happened. So it's these tiny little baby steps that we're going to notice, right? You're going to have days like I had the last 3 days, maybe, where it's like, I'm pretty sure that I've lost my mind. You may have those days. Who am I? What's going on here? What is happening? And that's God also. Remember, this is not just a walk in the park when there is awareness around what's happening. So you're courageously bringing a flashlight into what's happening on this planet. And that makes it much more intense in the sense that you're watching it, you're listening, you're hearing, you're feeling. A lot of people out there, they may be bringing God in and bringing that holy light in, that Holy Spirit in, but they're also just kind of doing their thing. So it's not as intense for them. And so they may be on the path, but their path is sort of chiller because they're not as dedicated to the journey like we are. We're students of it, and they're just doing it because they're like, well, this is cool. This is what I'm going to do. But we want to study it, right? We want to dive into it. We want to master this for some strange, odd reason. We've decided to become students of this. And so as students, it's going to get intense. You sit in the schoolroom and you're going to have tests. If you don't care, you're going to go out and about and figure it out on your own. Yeah. So anywho, that is our lesson today. Thanks, you guys, for being here.